Welcome to the Modeling, Conceptual Design, and Sustainability video presentation. Starting a new Revit file in the 3D view, under Massing and Site tab, you can create an in-place mass working within the Revit environment, or you can create a new conceptual mass using the mass family template. By using the family editor or template, you'll be able to see the reference planes and the levels and customize your mass with parameters that are formula driven, and save the family file so that you can use it in different Revit projects. We'll start by using model lines. I'll draw a rectangle and then select that rectangle and pick Create Form, Solid Form. Another option would be to start the rectangle model line and put a check mark and make surface from closed loops. By doing that, you're creating a surface. Even after you create the surface, you can select it and use these toggles to create a solid form. You can use these toggles on different faces of the model, on one of the edges here. Notice that if I use the tab key, I can tab to the different edges, surfaces, and even the point at this corner here for more control over editing. Select the form and pick X-ray so that you can see through the geometry, making it easier to add profiles. If you pick Add Profile, you can add several profiles here, then use the profile edges and points to continue modifying your model. You can add an edge to a face, giving you even more control over the geometry of your form. I'm using the Shift key with the wheel of the mouse, add another edge on this side to create interesting shapes. Another option would be to select Dissolve, deletes the form and keeps the profiles. You can then select all of the profiles and create another form based on those profiles. I can select a surface and pick Divide Surface. Picking Divide Surface, we have a UV grid. If I select U grid, then I'll have the vertical lines. If I select V grid, I'll have the horizontal lines. Turning these grids off, let's take a look at the intersects. You can create your own pattern by intersecting levels, reference planes, or lines that are on reference planes with this surface. We'll take a look at something basic like copying this level up, selecting here the surface, picking intersects, and then selecting here this level. Picking Finish, you'll see that there's a line there that's created, and it's based on a new pattern that you're creating with this level. Another way to create your own pattern using intersects is to select a reference plane like this one here. We'll select this vertical reference plane. We can set that one. Picking the Set tool, we can set this reference plane and show it, and then use the viewer to actively see that reference plane in relation to our model and draw lines that will represent our new pattern. These lines do not have to intersect the surface because they're being drawn on the reference plane. So I can bring that line way out to a new spot out in space here, because the lines will be superimposed onto the surface. Just move this up a little bit, and then I'll add a couple more. We're drawing lines on the reference plane using the viewer in the workspace. They're not on the surface yet. We'll select the surface and then pick Intersects. Using your Control key held down, you can select the lines that were drawn on that reference plane and then pick Finish. And you can see that they've jumped over from the reference to our surface. We'll close out of the viewer. And since that reference plane is still set to be the active reference plane, I can continue to draw lines on that reference plane and then select the surface and add more intersects, holding my control key down to add those two new lines that I just drew. I can pick finish, and now I have more grids placed on my surface. There's a direct relationship between the reference plane lines and the surface grids. If I unpin this reference plane and then move it, the lines are still actively a part of the surface grid. If I modify the lines, you can dynamically see the grid updating. Orbiting over to the other side, we can select the surface, pick divide surface. We can then change the properties from no pattern to a different pattern, like these arrows, or if we scroll down, we can use the triangular flat. And in the properties palette, you'll see that you can change the properties for the U grid and the V grid, changing the number and the justification and even the rotation of the grid. Also, by default, the border tile is partial. If we change that to empty, then pick apply, you'll see that the edges are empty. They don't fill out to the edge of the surface. If we use overhang, they'll overhang the surface edge. Using partial, we can fit the pattern in the surface outline. We can even customize this surface pattern in another Revit family file and load it into this Revit family file. We'll start by changing the U grid number and V grid number to 8, and then pick apply. Save this file, and then in the application menu we can create a new family, and that family is called Curtain Panel Pattern Base. Inside this family we can select the grid and change under properties the pattern to see the original lines that establish the pattern grid. Going to the triangular flat, before we change this family that came with Revit, we can save it as a different name so that we can modify it, sort of like duplicating. I'll call this pattern my pattern and pick save. Then we can give this flat shape either a surface and load it back into the mass family to create a solid surface, or we can give this pattern three-dimensional shape so that when we load it back into the 3D mass, it has depth. We'll copy these reference points up and then move them to a new location. We can look at the top view to get a better sense of where we're moving these. You could create another triangle, or I'm going to create a shape that's inside the triangle and then draw reference lines using the 3D snapping from each point. Going back to the 3D view by using the view cube, I can now select all of the reference planes and pick create form, solid form. I've created a solid form from this pattern, and now I'll save it, and when I pick load into project, instead of selecting the project one, I'll select the mass family that we were working with, I called extrusion, and I'll pick OK. It's loaded into this mass family. You won't see it until we select the surface and drop this list down of patterns. Scrolling down to the triangular flat pattern, I can then see my pattern. I'll select it and see that the surface updates to the new solid form that I created in the original pattern. We created a mass using create form, like an extrusion. We used divide surface, X-ray, adding an edge, adding a profile, and dissolve. Then we looked at creating U and V grids, intersects, patterns, and customizing those patterns. We will be coming back to the divide surface tool in one of the other modules where we'll look at more details about creating an adaptive curtain system and modifying the divided surfaces. Let's go ahead and save this file and close out of it, and we'll also close out of your pattern. In a brand new Revit file, we'll create a new conceptual mass using the mass Revit file. But this time, let's take a look at using the Create Form tool to create shapes that will revolve around an axis. So if we draw a line that represents the axis and a spline which will revolve around that line, we can select the line and the spline and pick Create Form, Solid Form. You have now the choice of creating a surface, or what we're going to pick here, a tool that will help us to revolve here that spline around the axis. We can select the mass, and in the properties, change the angle to 180 and pick Apply. Save this mass family and call it Revolve. And even with a shape like this, with openings and no floors, you'll get a warning, but you will be able to work with it. I'll load it into the project, go to the 3D view, and place that mass not on a face but on a work plane here at the top. I'm going to go ahead and place it right here in the 3D view. See, it gives me a warning that you won't be able to compute the mass floors, volume, or surface area. I'll go ahead and escape out of that. But we will be able to go to the Massing and Site tab and pick Roof. Select here the mass and model the face of the mass with our new generic roof. Then if we draw a wall here at the end, change the height and modify the profile, selecting there the wall and picking Edit Profile, we can pick lines, picking the inside surface of this arc, and create here a wall that fills the end of this mass. I'll go ahead and pick Finish Edit Mode and then change this wall to exterior glazing. Using Create Form, we were able to revolve the spline around an axis, creating a shape that we could load into Revit and work with unique shapes. Notice here in the project browser under Families, we have Mass, and under Mass we have our Revolve mass family that we loaded. Using Control Tab, we can go back to the Revolve mass family and close that family, create a brand new conceptual mass with the mass family template, and let's save this one as Loft. A loft is like a blend of profiles, similar to what we did in the first mass family when we used Dissolve and then used Create Form to create a form with all of the profiles. The first thing we'll do is copy this level 1 several times. We can hold our Control key down, select level 1, and drag our mouse up and let go, and we just created a new level. Holding our Control key down, we can continue to create 4 different levels. Now let's the distance between these levels to 20 feet. Now selecting the level 1 reference plane, we'll draw an ellipse. Select that ellipse, and in the clipboard panel, pick Copy, and then pick Paste and select Aligned to Selected Levels. Using your Control key, select levels 2, 3, and 4. Now use these end grips to modify the shape. You can use Rotate if you'd like, changing here the size and the rotation, and then select all of them and pick Create Form, Solid Form. You can select here one of the faces and pick X-ray to continue modifying your loft as we did in our first mass. We used the ellipse and we only created 4 levels, but as an example you could use a rectangle or create your own shape and create several levels modifying those profiles, Revit gives us the tools to create interesting building forms. Also keep in mind that with these creative forms, when we load them into the project and start to apply wall systems and roofs, you may get a warning. Let's save this mass family file and close it. Create a new conceptual mass using the mass Revit family file, and let's save it as sweep. We'll draw a spline that will represent the path and then place a point along that path that will act as a reference plane. When we select it and rotate around, you'll see there's a reference plane there. We can then draw our shape, select here the profile and the path, and use create form to create our new mass form. We can select it and pick X-ray and add profiles. Using those profiles, we can create shapes from that rectangle. And as we did with the other projects, we would load it into our Revit file and model by face the roof, the walls, and the mass floors. We should also take a look at using voids. If I draw a circle here, select that circle, and instead of using solid form, use a void form. Notice here that it cuts the shape. Voids will subtract the geometry from existing geometry. You can also establish additional forms and join them. Using the join tool, we can select the two shapes and join them together as one. And a swept blend is similar to a sweep, except there are several additional profiles. It's like a kind of a loft blend that's following a path. If I select all of these elements, I can pick create form and create a swept blend. You have a choice of creating more than one mass form in the family, but it's recommended to create a different family for each of your mass forms.